In the world of fantasy and gaming, dwarves are really iconic and very well represented. I mean, I've got so many different dwarf minis, it's ridiculous. I really like painting them. They're really fun models to paint. Now, I'm not a hobby historian. I don't know where the traditional Dungeons and Dragons style dwarf trope originated from. I know variations of dwarves in just kind of like a general sense have been in human folklore for centuries, but that like red bearded, drunken, axe wielding dwarf warrior that has a bit of humor that we all know and love, where did that come from? Probably Tolkien. I don't actually care. It's not really what I'm on about this week. This week, my thoughts wandered into the originality of dwarves, specifically characters and character models. With dwarves being so seminal to fantasy settings, I was wondering if it was even possible in this day and age to create a truly original dwarf character or miniature. I mean, surely you must be able to, right? But much like music, there's only so many ways that notes can be arranged in a pleasing and enjoyable way, so something truly original, while still enjoyable, is a damn near impossible task. A lot of originality tends to come from reused ideas in a new context. It's often juxtaposition that makes things unique, taking familiar tropes and combining them into something that feels hopefully kinda new. This is true of all sorts of art, and it's true of many themes running within science fiction, fantasy, horror, etc. In fantasy, I'd say the challenge of originality is especially hard with things like elves and dwarves, which are just so ingrained in the genre. With the rise of 3D printing Patreons over the last couple of years, our hobby has been absolutely flooded with new models and concepts. Each month, these companies strive to put out a set of new models that are exciting and enticing so that you want to, join their service. These sets are often themed because, we all love themes. Without going into really abstract territory that isn't widely appealing to audiences, these companies, I would think, are often pushed into this corner of needing to make sets that are both classic and useful for many games. Things like elves, warriors, snake people, goblins, aliens, robots, orcs, spellcasters, you get the idea. All of the archetypes, that we know and love. But to be competitive, to stay fresh and relevant, they have to also make these sets unique somehow. They have to constantly make original incarnations of really well-established archetypes. Now, as a content creator that actually has to physically create things each week, I know how just insanely difficult it is to be creative on demand sometimes, especially on a fast-paced, never-ending hamster wheel of a schedule, be it weekly for videos or monthly for model releases. This is a real challenge. And I work with a lot of these companies, both as sponsors for the channel and just as a hobbyist using them. I'm always in awe when a company can drop a set of something so well covered like vampires or demons and still make something new. Something that gets me excited. When I work with these companies, I often look through the models they have on offer for the month and use or make something inspired by the model that best grabs my attention, the thing that stands out. This week, when making something with Archvillain's dwarf set, I was drawn in by one particular model of a seated dwarven king. You don't see a lot of seated models, especially in ones meant for Dungeons and Dragons. At first, I was just gonna take that king model, separate him from the, very nice throne that they provide, and just hand sculpt my own version of that throne. But as it printed and I kind of brainstormed my direction, I came to this pondering of making classic tropes original. I thought about this challenge companies like Archvillain face each month, and I wondered if I personally was up to that same challenge. So when it came time to build, I switched gears and headed off in a wacky new direction. I wanted to take this one element of their model, just this seated king, and I wanted to turn him into a unique dwarven character mini. Something that hopefully has never been done before, although maybe it has, it probably has, at least something that I had personally never seen before. During this process, I realized just how challenging this task really is. more so than I expected. Now, I'm not a 3D modeler, I'm a crafter and a kit basher. I think if I were to just sit down with a piece of paper to conceptualize an original dwarf character model, I could come up with a few cool ideas, but I don't have the skills or knowledge to turn those ideas into 3D printable files, nor do I have the artistic hand to completely sculpt them from scratch. This presents another layer of challenge, making something new out of many things that already exist. But this is what I love about kit bashing. It offers endless possibilities within a pretty serious set of constraints of the items that you have on hand to work with. This is the type of challenge I really get into. I like working within some arbitrary constraints. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? While I really have no necessity to make some weird new dwarf model, I have a desire to do so, and I have my constraints, my parts. So in this way, constraints are the mother of invention, and I love that. That's a big part of my creative process and how I work as a creator. I mentioned before that originality is hard, but taking a few non-original things and putting them together in an original way can sometimes be just as good as getting something totally new. What if this dwarf wasn't a king? What if he was just some strange dwarf that rides around on a beast of some kind? Pig, a boar, a purple worm perhaps? That would be pretty cool. A dwarf riding a purple worm because they have a shared interest in mining through stone? I don't know, it just seems right. Has it been done before? I honestly don't know. In the vast library of D&D lore, specifically all that universe, I'm sure it has been done or come up, but not that I know of with my limited knowledge of extended lore. Regardless, it seemed perfect for me to have this regal looking character riding this horrific worm. Funnily enough, I didn't realize while building that Archvillain actually included their own type of giant ground worm in this month's set. I could have just printed that and used that. Aesthetically, it would have fit better with the model than the more rudimentary bones one that I had picked. That being said, this means that if you want to create a similar build yourself, you can do so more easily with this month's set, which, as I'm sure you've guessed by now, is all dwarf themed. It does contain all the usual classic kind of dwarves that you might need, but with their own sculpting style. If you want some traditional dwarven warriors to create an army or a bunch of NPCs, you've got the classics that are familiar, yet different enough to stand out from the rest. But there's also a bunch of really cool new models here. Archvillain makes really detailed models, and you get access to them each month through a subscription on their Patreon. I've printed and used a lot of their stuff in the past, and it's always been a pleasure to work with. The models are pre-supported and come both as STL files and as Lychee files, making it really convenient to get your prints going if you don't know much about preparing files for printing. While their models and themes are often really useful for many wargames, they mostly focus on models and themes that are usable for things like Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically 5th edition. Each month they even provide a companion module to use with the models in your 5th edition game, which is really great. They're one of the absolute bests in their field and high on my personal list of favorites. I really suggest that if you want to print some cool models at home, you jump on board. The link to their Patreon will be in the video description. I really like the direction this build started to take. There's something wonderfully whimsical about an armored dwarf in a throne riding a giant worm. It's not as rigid and traditional as what you usually see within this race. In my mind, I was sort of envisioning what a dwarven king might be like in a more Alice in Wonderland or Return to Oz type setting. Something more surreal. The idea of this giant, terrifying, earth-boring worm ripping through the ground, but strapped to it is this fancy dude in a nice chair riding it, like with bottles and barrels of ale and mead strapped to it. I love it. It makes no real sort of sense. I mean, how could a worm bore through a hole wider than itself in order to accommodate and fix all that extra crap strapped to it? I mean, yeah, it could, I guess, but it would be a slow process and not in line with how you would think that this creature would work. But that sort of nonsense, that side of things, is exactly what makes these universes so fun. I love the idea of this character, or character pair, I guess, bursting through the floor of a tavern to deliver the nectar of the gods. Maybe this guy isn't a king. Maybe he isn't even a living, breathing creature or dwarf. Perhaps he's more of an entity incarnate. Maybe he's a saint or a god. You know, the Dwarven Saint of Mead or something like that. I can think of a lot of really interesting ways to write a story around this absurd model and character. You know, he could be a comical weirdo that surprises a party when they're in the very boring tavern. Maybe he's the owner of a nearby meadery and needs help with a problem, but rather than taking a horse and cart into town and entering the tavern through the door like a normal person, he instead bursts through the floor on this giant worm. Or maybe he's a terrible villain. Maybe he's not delivering the goods strapped to his mount back. Maybe he's a thief. He enters secure areas by tunneling through the earth below in order to strap treasures and valuables to his partner in crime in order to make a quick escape, unnoticed by the outside world. An adventure could revolve around a burglary where the only starting clue is this tunnel in the floor of a vault or a cellar, maybe in a meadery. Maybe the culprit is a competing beer maker, and maybe that adventure could conclude with an epic battle where this crazy weird model gets dropped on the table as the villain bursts through the ground unexpectedly to confront our heroes. That's the wonderful thing about making a model like this. Something a little different, something with interesting details, something that obviously has some kind of story to be told, something that could have many different stories told. It's the kind of model that sort of writes its own story. Forcing myself to come up with a unique model has now given me that finished model that will make it easy to create a unique narrative. Often we rely on sculptors and companies to make these inspirational characters and stories for us, and rightly so. They're in the trenches day in and day out coming up with cool concepts and miniatures. But I think it's worth every hobbyist's time to challenge themselves once in a while to take something so overdone, so familiar, and try to do something new with it. Be it a new character for your role-playing game or a new model for your army. I challenge you to try this for yourself. Can you make an original elf character model, for example? How about an original goblin build? Now there's a challenge. I believe that you can. I'm really happy with this. This is a very cool character and a very cool mini, and I'm really proud of myself for this one. It's a win in every way. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you like the mini. If you like the video, hit the like button. Let me know in the comments section below. If you want to grab any tools or supplies for your own hobby needs, there's a great way that you can support the channel and these videos while getting them for yourself. Go to blackmagiccraft.ca. There I have an essential equipment page where I link to all the stuff that I use regularly on Amazon. You get the right thing. I get a bit of money to help fund the production of these videos, and everybody wins at no extra cost to you. But if you really, really, really like these videos that I do, if you find them inspirational, entertaining, whatever, and you want to help me keep making them, the best way you can do that is by supporting the channel on Patreon. The funds there are the main reason I'm allowed to spend time doing stuff like this and sharing it with you guys. And I'd love to have you as the newest member. That's it for this week, guys. Let me know what your lore for this character is in the comments below. I'd like to hear some cool ideas. Cheers. See you again next week.